Welcome everyone to my 4.7 Furina guide. Furina is getting a rerun soon, and it's about time to make a new guide. In this guide, I will go over her kit and what she does, playstyles, talent priority, artifacts and stats, weapons, team comps, and finally, constellations. And without further ado, let's get into Furina's kit. Furina is a 5-star Hydro sub DPS and damage buffer. She scales on HP, wields a sword, and has a crit rate ascension bonus. Furina's normal attacks deal 4 hits of physical damage, and once every 6 seconds, deals an instance of Arkhe aligned hydro damage. Furina has a special ability where she can change her Arkhe alignment by using her charged attack. Furina's charged attack deals physical damage and switches her Arkhe alignment. Furina's starting alignment is Uzia, and her outfit changes between both Arkhe alignment, with the black outfit being in the Uzia state, and the white outfit in the Numa state. The Arkhe alignment switching is useful in exploring Fontaine and solving some puzzles, but it also changes what her elemental skill does. Furina's elemental skill in the Uzia state summons 3 Salon members. Each summon deals hydro damage scaling on max HP. These hydro summons will attack all nearby opponents, even animals and objects in the overworld. The 3 Salon members will attack indiscriminately. Each summon attacks at their own intervals, prioritizing your active target. If any of your party members' HP is above 50%, each of the Salon members' attack will consume a different amount of HP from party members with over 50% of HP, increasing their damage in the process. The more party members that have 50% of HP or above, the summons will consume their HP and increase their damage further. If 4 party members are above 50% of max HP, the Hydro Summons damage will be increased by 40%. Each of these Hydro Summons will follow you around and even teleport to nearby enemies. All Hydro Summons have their own separate attack intervals and Hydro application cooldown, which makes Furina's Hydro application slower than other Hydro characters, like Yelan or Xingqiu. When any Hydro Summon attacks an enemy, they will generate 1 energy particle every 2.5 seconds. In the Numa state, Furina will summon the Singer of Many Waters, which heals your active character while you're within range. Switching Arkhe alignment will reposition your summons. All types of summons have a duration of 30 seconds, and Furina's skill has a cooldown of 20 seconds. Both types of summons will share the same duration. And while either type of summon is present, Furina gains the ability to walk on water. Furina's Burst is where her damage buffing ability comes from. Casting Furina's Burst deals AoE hydro damage and allows party members to enter the Universal Revelry state. During this state, each 1% increase or decrease in any party member's HP will grant 1 Fanfare point. For each 1 Fanfare point, all party members' elemental and physical damage bonus will be increased by 0.23%, and healing bonus increased by 0.09% at talent level 9. Fanfare points can be stacked just by changing your HP percentage, so be it Furina's Hydro summons draining HP, getting hit, or being healed, you will gain Fanfare points. Since this applies to all teammates, having team-wide healers will allow you to quickly change your team's total HP, therefore allowing you to stack Fanfare points quickly. The maximum number of Fanfare points achievable at C0 is 300, so if you manage to max out the Fanfare points, you can get a 69% damage bonus to all party members at talent level 9, which needless to say is a huge buff. You also get additional healing bonus through this buff, which allows your healers to heal even more HP, generating more Fanfare points. You can also track how many Fanfare points you have through these little indicators that appear on the screen at 25% of total Fanfare points, 50%, 75%, and 100%. This burst has an energy cost of 60, a duration of 18 seconds, and a cooldown of 15 seconds. Moving on to her passives, Furina's first passive allows other party members to be healed if your current active character's healing overflows. This works when your current active character receives healing, and when your HP reaches 100% and overflows, Furina's passive activates and heals 2% of all other party members' max HP every 2 seconds for the next 4 seconds. This passive heals a decent amount of HP and allows healers like Bennett, who only heal your active character, to generate more Fanfare points. Her second passive increases your elemental skill summons damage or healing for the Uziah-aligned Salon members, for each 1,000 of Furina's HP, damage will be increased by 0.7%, up to a maximum of 28%. For your Numa-aligned summon, the interval between each heal will be decreased by 0.4% for every 1,000 of Furina's HP, for a maximum of 16%. To fully maximize both parts of this passive, you will need 40,000 HP. This passive not only increases Furina's own personal damage, but it also makes using an HP goblet slightly better than a hydro damage goblet at C0. And lastly, Furina's exploration passive lowers the cooldown of your underwater skills by 30%. Moving on to playstyles, Furina's role in most teams is going to be to deal off-field damage and apply hydro while buffing all party members' damage. Furina's own personal damage from her elemental skill salon members is very decent and can amount to 15 to 30% of your team's total damage. The healing from her Numa form is nice for overworld exploration, but during combat I rarely use it. Being a hydro character allows Furina to fit into many teams, ranging from Vaporize, Freeze, Hyper Bloom, and many more. And you don't even have to play for a specific reaction. Some hypercarry teams benefit a lot from her universal damage buff. Furina's hydro application is somewhat slow though, but the 100% uptime on her elemental skill makes it very strong in some teams where you don't need a lot of hydro. Adding to that, her hydro application isn't restricted in space, as the summons can move around and target multiple enemies. Furina's own hydro application can allow some characters that apply their respective elements on a standard cooldown to trigger reactions consistently. On the other hand, characters that don't have standard application cooldown, such as Shangling or Hu Tao's charged attack, will need another character applying hydro, as Furina's hydro application is not going to be enough. The same also goes with other teams that need a lot of hydro, such as Hyper Bloom. Furina's damage buff is huge, and what makes it even better is that it applies to all party members and elements, making her a very strong option with a lot of damage dealers and teams. Since Furina also gives a lot of damage bonus, switching your goblet to attack, HP, or defense, instead of damage bonus also becomes a more viable option. Sometimes it's even better to do so. Since Furina's elemental skill summons drain HP if a character's HP is above 50%, this allows you to run Marechaussee Hunter on many different characters who don't have HP draining mechanisms in their kit. For example, with Navia, you can run Marechaussee Hunter if you have Furina in your team, and with your healer, you can keep Navia's HP above 50% to consistently keep Marechaussee Hunter's crit rate buff active. While Furina has many benefits, such as the 100% uptime on her hydro application and the team-wide damage buff, there are still some things to consider regarding Furina, such as the need for a healer in your team and the fact that she doesn't generate a lot of energy. Overall, Furina is one of the strongest support units in the game, and one I would highly recommend, especially for players who have been playing for a long time. When it comes to Furina's talent priority, I would recommend leveling up both of her burst and skill, with her burst taking a slightly higher priority. Normal attacks are not necessary to level, and you don't have to level them. Almost all of Furina's personal damage comes from her skill, while her buff is tied to her burst level. Moving on to artifacts, Furina's best option is going to be Golden Troop. This set's 2-piece bonus increases elemental skill damage by 20%, and the 4-piece bonus increases skill damage by a further 25%, and another 25% when the wielding character is off-field, which brings the total to 70% skill damage. And since Furina deals most of her damage from her skill and is mostly going to be off-field, this set is going to be her best in slot, around 13% better than the next best option. Since Furina's own personal damage contributes a lot to your team's overall damage, I would highly recommend building for it, and going for Golden Troop to increase Furina's damage is definitely worth it. This set also shares the same domain with Marechaussee Hunter, which is a universal set, viable on many characters with Furina in your team. Going for a 2-piece mix with HP, Hydro damage, Golden Troop, and Emblem for the energy recharge is also viable. A 2-piece HP and HP mix is oftentimes Furina's second best option. 2-piece HP is slightly better than Hydro damage due to Furina's passive, which increases skill damage by how much HP you have. Vodokasha's Glow's effect does not work on Furina since her skill's HP draining does not count as taking damage. Nymph's Dream increases both hydro damage and attack. Furina does not scale on attack, and therefore this set does not perform that well. Tenacity of the Millilith can be the best set for your other party members' damage, as the set provides an attack buff when the wielding character's elemental skill hits an opponent. Furina can maintain 100% uptime on this set, and in some situations, this set can be better for overall team damage if your main DPS scales heavily on attack. But in most cases, I would recommend sticking with Golden Troop for Furina's own personal damage. Before going over main stats, let's firstly talk about how much energy recharge Furina needs. Furina's elemental skill does not generate a lot of energy, and since her burst provides the damage buff, you will want enough energy recharge to consistently use her burst. In most teams with decent energy generation or Favonius on the team, I would recommend between 160% to 180% energy recharge. I usually run around 160%. And for teams like Ayaka or Clorand Quickbloom, this is usually sufficient. In some other teams that struggle with energy, you may need a lot more energy recharge, 180 to 200% energy recharge. If you're running a second Hydro unit, you can get away with less energy, 140% to 160%. With Neuvillette, you can go for 110% to 130% energy recharge. Furina's C4 gives her extra energy, and with that, you can usually go with around 40% less energy than you normally would. As for main stats, for your Sands, you will want to go for either HP or energy recharge if you're lacking energy. For your Goblet, at C0, HP is usually around 3% to 5% better than Hydro damage, but you can definitely choose whichever Goblet has better substats. With Furina's C2, both Hydro damage and HP Goblets are comparable in strength, and you should choose based on substats. As for your Circlet, go for either crit rate or damage, whichever you need more off. And for your substats, you will want energy recharge until your target is met, crit rate and damage, and lastly, HP. Moving on to weapons, since Furina does not scale on attack, you will generally want weapons with lower base attack and high crit value instead. Furina has many strong options, including some free-to-play options. All calculations were made with the Genshin simulator. Furina's best in slot is going to be her signature weapon, Splendor of Tranquil Waters. This weapon provides 88.2% crit damage and increases elemental skill damage when the wielding character's HP increases or decreases. Additionally, it also increases HP when other party members' HP increases or decreases. Both effects can stack twice. Overall, this is Furina's best in slot, but it is not at all a necessary pull, as Furina has many other strong 5 stars and 4 stars. Uraku Misugiri also provides a lot of crit damage, and increases elemental skill and normal attack damage. With a Geo party member, the normal attack and elemental skill damage bonus will increase. With a Geo party member, this weapon is slightly behind Splendor of Tranquil Waters. Otherwise, this weapon is going to be Furina's second best most of the time, and not far off Splendor of Tranquil Waters. Primordial Jade Cutter is another decent option, as it increases crit rate by a lot and also increases HP. Key of Kaj Nisut gives a lot of HP, and the elemental mastery buff it provides can be decent in teams that can make use of it. Other crit 5-star weapons are also usable. Festering Desire is going to be Furina's best 4-star option, as it increases both energy recharge and elemental skill damage. This is an event weapon though, and not everyone may have it. Fleuve-Cendre Ferryman is a free weapon, obtainable by fishing. This weapon increases energy recharge and elemental skill crit rate, making it a decent option, better than a lot of other 4 stars. Wolffang should theoretically be decent, as it increases both elemental skill and burst crit rate. However, Furina needs to be on field to trigger the crit rate buff. If you are able to trigger some stacks while on field, this should be a decent option, but realistically, it's not going to be much better than Fleuve-Cendre Ferryman. The same also goes with Harbinger of Dawn. This weapon gives both crit rate and damage. However, your current HP must be higher than 90% to gain the crit rate buff. In this ranking here, I'm assuming an 80% uptime on this effect. Realistically though, in combat, you might be taking damage sometimes, or the healing isn't enough, but you can sometimes maintain this effect, especially with healers that keep on providing continuous healing to maintain your HP above 90%. Generally, I wouldn't recommend this weapon over Fluve Sender Ferryman, but you can definitely use it if you don't have other options. Overall, Furina has many options to choose from, including decent free options, and her signature weapon is not a necessity. Before going over teams, I just want to note that my Furina is at C2 throughout all gameplay in this video, which makes most teams perform 10 to 20% better than C0, and it also makes the healing a lot stronger than it would normally be. But I tested C0 Furina for an older video before activating her Constellations, and she will still be strong regardless. When it comes to teams, Furina has many different possible team options, and because of that, it is not feasible for me to list all the possible team combinations. With that in mind, I'll be going over some team archetypes and teams with some newer damage dealers. But before that, let's first go over what healers you can use with Furina. To stack Fanfare points during Furina's burst, you need to increase or decrease your party member's HP. Furina's skill summons Drain HP, and alongside a party-wide healer, you can quickly stack Fanfare points. Healers with Furina can be stacked into 3 categories: healers who can heal the whole party without taking up a lot of on-field time, like Jean or Baiju; healers that can heal your active character and the whole party while they're on field, like Yao Yao or Kokomi; and healers that only heal your active character, like Bennett or Kuki Shinobu. Off-field party-wide healers are great for quickly generating Fanfare points without taking up a lot of field time. You can also add Catalyst users equipping Prototype Amber in this category. While the healing from Prototype Amber is not huge, you can definitely use it to assist with stacking Fanfare points in some teams. Other healers that need on-field time to heal the whole party are great for driving your team, such as Kokomi in an Electro Charge team, or even Yao Yao in a Nilou Bloom team. Healers that only heal your active character can be a decent option for your team if the trade-off is worth it. For example, if you're playing an attack scaling main DPS, using Bennett as your healer can sometimes be worth it if the buff Bennett provides is valuable enough for your team. Characters like Bennett also have a healing cap, where in this case he doesn't heal when your HP is above 70%. With Furina, you can still trigger her overhealing passive if Bennett heals when you're below 70%, and heals enough to trigger Furina's passive. Furina also increases healing bonus, and this usually isn't a huge issue. There is also a bonus category to your healers, which are characters that have strong self-sustain and trigger Furina's passive. Characters like Nouvelette and Clorand can heal themselves enough to trigger Furina's passive. And while the healing won't be a lot, it is sometimes worth it to just rely on this healing and use another character to support your team instead of a healer. In short, most healers will work fine with Furina, even if they take on-field time or only heal your active character. When forming any team with Furina, it will usually start with this basic setup. You use your main DPS alongside either a sub-DPS or a support, then Furina and a healer who can provide relevant buffs to your team. Let's start with vaporized teams. With a pyro DPS like Hu Tao, you can form a team with Furina, and a second hydro like Yelan or Xingqiu to allow for more consistent vaporizes, and lastly a healer like Jean or even Baiju for Burgeon. You can also use Xianyun and enable plunge Hu Tao. Although Hu Tao usually doesn't want a healer to maintain her passive, using Furina is worth it with Hu Tao, and one of Hu Tao's best teams is the plunge team with Xianyun. With Diluc, you can also form a similar team. You can also use another support instead of a second hydro, since Diluc can't vaporize constantly. You can form a team with Furina, Bennett, and Xianyun for plunge Diluc. You can also form a similar team with Ga Ming or Yoimiya. With Yoimiya, you can switch out Xianyun with another support and rely on Bennett's healing. With Shangling, you need consistent hydro application. Alongside Furina, you can use another hydro character like Yelan, Xingqiu, or even an on-field character like Shield. And lastly, use Bennett as your healer, since without Bennett, Shangling will face a lot of energy issues. You can also form a similar team with Linny. Furina's low hydro application will keep Linny's passive active. With Hyper Bloom, you also need a second hydro unit to consistently bloom. It is important to note that Furina does not increase bloom damage, she increases damage bonus. Alongside Furina and your second hydro character, you will need a strong Dendro applier and an Electro character. You can use Kokomi in this team to both apply Hydro, drive the team, and heal the whole team. And for your Dendro spot, you can use Nahida and Kuki for your Electro character. Quick Bloom teams work with less caveats with Furina, as the purpose of these teams is often to focus on your Electro or Dendro damage, with the Blooms as an added bonus. With Clorand, you can form teams without a healer, relying on Clorand's self-sustain to trigger Furina's passive. Alongside Clorand, you can use an Electro sub DPS, like Fischl, Yaimiko, or even Kuki, if you need more healing, with Nahida as your Dendro character, and lastly Furina. You can also use Baiju in place of Nahida here. What you can also do to generate more Fanfare points is to use Prototype Amber on Nahida to get extra team-wide healing. You can also play a similar team with Sino, but using a healer like Baiju in place of Nahida. You can also use Kuki as your second Electro and healer. You can also form a very similar team with other Hydro, Electro, and Dendro characters. You can use Alhaitham as your main DPS or even Ayato in this team. Nilou Bloom teams with Furina can also work. Alongside Nilou and Furina, you can go with 2 Dendro units or 1 Dendro and 1 Hydro. With 2 Dendro units, you can use Nahida alongside a Dendro healer like Baiju or Yao Yao. In a Nilou Bloom team with Furina, I usually run Yao Yao and use her on-field during her burst. But when Yao Yao's burst is over, I'm not really on-fielding anyone. To solve this issue, you can run 3 Hydro characters, which can be Nilou, Furina, and Kokomi, to both drive and heal, alongside Nahida. With Navia, you can use Furina alongside a healer and a last spot being a Geo, sub DPS, or another support. Your healer can be Bennett for the attack buff, or use Xianyun to enable plunge. You can also play Furina with Ito if you have C4 Goru to provide team-wide healing. Alongside Ito, you can use a Geo sub DPS like Chiori, Goru, and Furina. Noelle can heal the whole party while also dealing decent damage. Alongside Noelle, you can use Furina, Goru, and a Geo sub DPS like Chiori. You can also use Bennett instead of either Geo units. Freeze teams are strong with Furina. With Ayaka, you can use a second Cryo sub DPS or support like Shenhe, alongside Furina, and lastly an Animo healer like Jean or Xianyun to provide Viridescent Venerer resistance reduction. You can also use Charlotte in place of your second Cryo unit and use Kazuha instead of an Animo healer. The same teams also apply with Ganyu or Ryothusli. With Ganyu, you can also use Venti to group enemies. Electrocharged team comps also work great with Furina. You can go with either a Hydro or an Electro character to play on-field. With a Hydro driver like Kokomi, you can use Furina, an Electro sub DPS like Fischl, and lastly an Animo support like Kazuha or either another Electro or Hydro character. With an Electro main DPS like Raiden Shogun, you can run Furina alongside a second Hydro like Yelan, and lastly a healer, which can be a unit of either element like Siegeween or an Animo healer like Jean. You can also turn the Electro-charged team into a Mono Hydro 1, replacing your Electro character with another Hydro unit. An example of this can be with Kokomi as your healer and driver, Furina, Yelan, and Kazuha as your Animo support. While this team is not triggering any specific reaction, Mono Hydro still deals a lot of damage, especially so with Furina. And lastly, for more specialized teams, Neuvillette and Furina can form a very strong team. Furina's damage buff makes up for losing 1 stack in Neuvillette's passive, and you can also rely on Neuvillette's healing to stack Fanfare points in this team. Alongside both characters, you can use Kazuha and a support like Zhongli. You can also switch out Zhongli with a healer like Baiju or even Charlotte. With Xiao, you can use Faruzan, Furina, and lastly Bennett or Xianyun as your healer. With Wanderer, you can also use the same team. Mika and Charlotte also become decent options for your healer. C4 Jean is also an option in both teams. Of course, these are just some of the many possible team comps. Again, it's not possible for me to list all team comps for each character with Furina. If you are looking for a certain character, I would recommend searching for a guide on that character instead. And lastly, Constellations. There are 2 sheets here. One is for Furina's own damage, and the second is the total team damage. Furina's C1 gives her a starting 150 Fanfare points when using her burst, and raises the maximum number of Fanfare points from 300 to 400. This constellation is good for both team damage and Furina's own damage, as it gives you a starting 34.5% damage bonus at burst level 9. This is a decent first constellation. C2 increases the number of Fanfare points gained during Furina's burst by 250%, and each point that exceeds the 400 Fanfare points limit will increase Furina's max HP by 0.35%. The maximum HP increase is 140%. With C2, you will be getting 3.5 Fanfare points for every 1% change in HP. This makes Bennett's healing and even prototype Amber able to easily max out Furina's damage buff. The max HP increase is also huge, which greatly increases her personal damage. This is easily Furina's best early constellation and a good stopping point. C3 adds 3 levels to her burst, which gives more damage to your whole party and increases Furina's own damage. C4 triggers when Furina's Uzia state Hydro summons hit an opponent, or her Numa state healer heals a party member, regenerating 4 energy to Furina once every 5 seconds. This is another strong constellation, as it helps a lot with her energy-related issues, decreasing your energy cost by around 40%. This constellation allows you to build Furina for more damage instead of energy recharge, therefore increasing Furina's personal damage. C5 adds 3 levels to her elemental skill, and C6 adds Hydro Infusion to Furina's normal attacks after using her elemental skill, lasting for 10 seconds or 6 hits. Normal attack damage will also be increased by 18% of max HP. Differing effects will also be triggered depending on Furina's Arkhe Alignment. During the Uzia state, when Furina's Hydro-infused normal attacks hit, all party members will be healed by 4% of Furina's max HP every 1 second for 2.9 seconds. More hits will also extend this duration. During the Numa state, normal attack damage will be further increased by 25% of max HP. When an attack hits an opponent, 1% of HP will be consumed from all party members. This way, you can also use Marechaussee Hunter during her Numa state. C6 allows you to play Furina on field, unlocking many more teams, and even allows her to drive some teams with her Hydro Infusion. The Uzia state also allows her to heal all party members, which makes using a healer in your team no longer a requirement. For example, in an Ayaka team, with Furina, you had to use a healer, but with C6, you can drop Jean in this team and replace her with Kazuha, bringing more damage overall. Overall, this is a strong 6 constellation, but also a very expensive one. Furina's constellations are very strong, especially her early ones. However, none of her constellations are necessary. I know I'm saying this with C2 unlocked, but I have tested C0 Furina a lot for a previous video, and I can confidently say she's strong enough without any constellations. But that's all from this guide. Furina has been one of my favorite characters released in Fontaine, and without her my channel might not have been where it is now. Thank you for making it till the end, and thank you for watching.